you've watched the movie, trust me, this version will claw its way deeper than anything a screen ever showed you. Because this is the story that was never filmed. The one whispered, not written. The one that makes the lake feel alive, even before the killer appears. I want you to listen slowly, breathe slowly, and imagine the darkness thick enough to press on your skin. The year was 1980, a year people remember for screams that didn't make it into any police report. A year when a group of teenagers walked into Camp Crystal Lake, and only silence walked out. They said the camp was cursed. They said the water wasn't normal. They said the boy who drowned there, the boy with the empty eyes, still dragged his breath through the trees at night. But they never said what really mattered. They never said what the survivors actually heard. The wet sound, the slow, sticky dragging on the wooden dock, the breathing, too close, too human, too angry. That night, the teenagers lit a fire. They laughed. They told jokes. They pretended the darkness wasn't listening. But the lake listened, and something beneath its surface woke up. Not all at once, but like a memory forcing its way back into a rotting skull. The first scream wasn't even loud, just a soft, cut-off breath, as if someone's mouth was covered by a wet, cold hand. Then the second scream tore the air. It sounded like ribs snapping from the inside. The fire shook, the trees shook, and the lake, the quiet lake, gave a sound like something enormous rising through thick mud. That was the night the legend breathed again. The night the maskless shadow stood behind the cabins, watching, waiting, choosing, and none of them, not a single one, knew they had already been marked by a boy who never stopped drowning. The night deepened. The fire had burned low, leaving more shadows than light. Each cabin seemed to breathe, wooden walls creaking like old bones. You could feel the lake's cold touch sneaking through the cracks, curling around their ankles, whispering warnings that nobody understood. Inside one cabin, the first teenager, her name was Alice, heard the floorboards groan behind her. A small, subtle shift, almost polite, but the kind of polite that hides teeth. She spun around. Nothing. The room was empty. But then, a breath. Not hers. Bit. Slow. Deliberate. Outside, the wind carried faint laughter. Or maybe it was something else. A sound like cracking bones dragging across soft earth. Alice pressed her back against the wall, eyes wide, heart hammering, thinking she could disappear into the thin shadows cast by the dying fire. But the maskless boy, the one they never knew existed, was already inside the perimeter of the camp. His gaze didn't just look. It dissected. It chose. And one by one, the teenagers were about to learn what fear tasted like. Not the quick shriek and a flash of death in the movies, but the slow, intimate terror of someone standing right behind you, watching you try to breathe. A scream split the night. It wasn't Alice. It was Mike. He had thought he could hide under the cabin's bed, thinking the shadow outside couldn't follow him in. But it did. And the sound that followed was the sound of reality cracking inside your skull. The others didn't know what was happening. They called for him, whispered his name, but the forest answered back with silence. Or worse, a dragging, wet, patient breathing. By the time they realized he was gone, the maskless boy had already marked another soul for the lake to remember. And that was the first time the camp understood. There was no running. There was no escaping. Only the slow, inevitable, and the sharp, deliberate, and the terrifying intimacy of being hunted by someone who never forgot how to drown. The forest had swallowed the first scream, but it didn't let go. It kept echoing between the trees, crawling into every cabin, every heartbeat. The teenagers were terrified now, their laughter gone, replaced by trembling whispers and shallow breaths. Alice and another girl, Brenda, tried to find Mike. They ran through the cabins, doors banging against walls, their shoes leaving prints in the mud outside, a trail for something patient, something that didn't stumble. Then they saw it. A shadow flickered at the edge of the firelight. Not human, not fully, Something alive, angry, waiting. Brenda froze. Alice wanted to scream, but her throat burned. And then the sound came. The wet, sticky sound of flesh tearing. Mike's scream cut off. Silence. The shadow stepped forward. Not a boy anymore, not fully. A presence grown from grief, rage, something that refused to die. It moved with precision, with purpose, like a predator playing a sadistic game. Alice and Brenda ran. Through the mud, over roots, past the cabins. But every path seemed to bend back. Every tree leaning in. Every shadow stretching farther than it should. The boy who never died was shaping the forest, making it a trap. A glimpse of his face. Not masked. Empty eyes. Pale skin glistening like it had just emerged from the lake. A grin that wasn't friendly. A grin that promised pain. He was coming for them. They stumbled into the main lodge. He followed. No noise but the dragging of his feet. Wet, deliberate, patient. Every heartbeat a drum. Every breath a countdown. By the time the first strike came, Brenda screamed like the world was ending. Alice watched, frozen, as reality tore apart in front of her eyes. And in that moment, she understood. The camp wasn't cursed. It was alive, and it was hungry. The maskless boy didn't just kill. He chose, slowly, intimately, marking the beginning of a night that would never be forgotten, and a story no movie could capture in its full, terrifying horror. The forest was alive now. Every rustle, every snapping twig sounded deliberate, like it had a mind of its own. Alice and Brenda ran blindly, hearts hammering, lungs burning, the scent of mud and fear thick in the air. The boy, maskless, pale, relentless, followed without a sound. His feet barely touched the ground, yet every step left an invisible mark of dread. The shadows bent toward him, guiding, enclosing. The campers' laughter from earlier that night was nothing but a memory, a foolish memory mocking them. Brenda tripped over a root. Alice grabbed her arm, pulling her up, but the boy was closer, closer than any human should be without being seen. The forest seemed to aid him, branches curling like claws, roots tangling like hands. They reached the edge of the cabins again. A light flickered inside one, half a lantern, half a dying hope. Alice dared a glance through the window. Inside, a shadow moved, something bending, twisting, impossible. A body that didn't obey the rules of flesh. Brenda screamed. A low, guttural sound came from behind them. It was wet, sticky. Every nerve screamed to run, but their legs were slow, stiff with terror. The boy appeared suddenly at the edge of the firelight. No mask, no hesitation. Empty eyes scanning, choosing, marking. He raised his hand, slowly, deliberately, and the night seemed to shiver. Alice felt the cold brush of death behind her. Not touching yet, just close enough to burn with fear. Her mind screamed to fight, to run, to escape, but the forest laughed with him, bending paths, hiding exits, twisting reality into a nightmare maze. By the time they reached the main lodge again, they realized something horrifying. The boy wasn't just hunting them individually. He was studying them, learning them, turning their fear into a weapon. And that's when Alice understood. This wasn't just a killing. It was a game. A sadistic, slow game, played by someone who never forgot how it felt to die, and who wanted them to feel it too. The forest had closed in. Every cabin, every tree, every shadow felt like it was alive, breathing, watching, waiting. Alice and Brenda stumbled through the mud, hearts hammering like drums of doom. The boy followed, silent but omnipresent. Every step they took, he was there. Every glance backward confirmed it. Empty eyes, pale skin, a grin carved from rage. The embodiment of death, patient, perfect. Brenda fell again, screaming this time. Alice grabbed her hand, dragging her upright, but it didn't matter. The boy was faster, smarter, anticipating every move. The forest itself seemed to conspire with him, roots reaching like fingers, branches closing in, the darkness folding into itself, making escape impossible. They reached a small clearing. A fire flickered weakly in the wind, a pitiful remnant of hope. Alice's eyes caught movement, a shadow bending unnaturally, sliding closer with the sound of wet, tearing cloth. The boy's presence was suffocating, a cold pressure on the skin, a whisper in the blood. You cannot survive. Brenda stumbled toward the fire, hoping for a distraction. Alice screamed for her to stop, but it was too late. The boy emerged from the edge of the shadows, not masked, not hesitant, leaning closer, empty eyes drilling into their souls. The first strike landed. Brenda cried out, a wet, tearing sound that froze Alice in place. The boy's hands were precise, cruel, intimate, each movement deliberate, each step feeding on their terror. Alice ran blindly. The forest mocked her, twisting paths, closing exits, dragging her back toward him with every heartbeat. She could feel his breath behind her, the cold touch of his hands almost there, but just out of reach. And then she realized there was no cabin, no lodge, no clearing safe enough. No hiding, no mercy. The boy who never died was everywhere and nowhere, a living nightmare, turning fear into a weapon, more terrifying than death itself. Alice stumbled into the next cabin, her breath ragged, every heartbeat loud in her ears. The air smelled of wet wood, decay, and fear that had soaked into the walls. Brenda was behind her, trembling, unable to speak. Neither of them dared look back, but they felt him. The boy was near. Every shadow whispered his presence, every creak a warning. Not a boy, not a man. Something older, sharper, a predator sculpted by grief and rage. His empty eyes pierced the darkness, choosing, marking, planning. Inside the cabin, the floorboards groaned under their weight, but the groans were not theirs alone. Something else shifted. Wet, heavy, patient. The boy moved without a sound, but every nerve in Alice's body screamed that he was there. Brenda gasped, tripping over a chair. Alice grabbed her, yanking her upright, but the boy was closer than ever, leaning from the shadows, watching the fear spread between them like a virus. A window rattled, a door slammed, the fire outside flickered and died, leaving only darkness thick enough to choke. Alice could hear a wet, dragging noise, like something tearing through flesh, and a quiet, satisfied sigh that made her stomach turn. The boy struck again. Brenda screamed, the sound cutting through the cabin. Sharp, wet, final. Alice froze, paralyzed by terror, watching as the nightmare reached out for her, closer, closer, until the darkness itself seemed alive, pressing, suffocating. She ran blindly toward the back door, the boy following, never stopping, never blinking, every step calculated, every movement intimate and cruel. The forest outside had shifted again, paths bending, shadows stretching, guiding her into his trap. And Alice realized, as her legs trembled and lungs burned, this was no random attack. It was a lesson, a slow, deliberate, sadistic lesson, taught by someone who had mastered fear, and intended to make her understand it, fully, painfully, irreversibly. Alice stumbled into a clearing, her body trembling, every breath ragged. The forest seemed to shift around her, trees bending unnaturally, shadows stretching like grasping hands. Brenda was nowhere in sight. Alice's heart pounded louder than the whispers of the wind. And then she saw him, not masked, not hiding. The boy who never died stood there, still as stone, pale skin glistening under the weak moonlight, empty eyes boring into her soul. For a moment, nothing moved. Then a slow step, deliberate, echoing in the quiet. Alice froze, knowing she couldn't outrun this. Every instinct screamed to fight, but her body betrayed her with trembling legs. The boy tilted his head, studying her, choosing, marking, understanding fear like a living thing. And then he moved closer, hands reaching, but not yet touching, just close enough to burn with terror. Alice remembered the stories, the warnings about Camp Crystal Lake, but nothing prepared her for this intimacy with death. Every breath she took was counted, measured, every heartbeat a drum calling her closer to the inevitable. She tried to run. Branches tore at her clothes, roots clawed her ankles, but he was there, always there, shaping the forest into a trap, turning every escape into illusion. A scream echoed from behind. Brenda. Alice wanted to turn, wanted to help, but fear held her in place, rooted like the twisted trees around her. The boy took another step. Closer, 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 and Alice realized the confrontation wasn't meant to be survived. It was meant to be experienced. Every second, every breath, every glance, painfully, intimately, was part of the lesson he had been teaching since the first scream. She closed her eyes, and the forest, the shadows, the boy, all pressed in, waiting for her next move, ready to etch terror into her memory forever. Alice's lungs burned, every breath shallow, ragged. The forest seemed alive, twisting around her like a serpent, branches reaching like hands, roots snaring her ankles. Every shadow whispered, every sound was amplified. Footsteps, leaves, something wet dragging across the earth. The boy, maskless, pale, relentless, was everywhere and nowhere. Each step he took was precise, calculated, intimate. He moved through the shadows like a predator born of grief and rage, shaping the darkness into a maze, turning fear into a weapon. Brenda's scream echoed again, sharp and wet. Alice's stomach churned, while rising as terror clawed at her. She stumbled into another cabin, doors slamming behind her, the shadows bending, stretching, following her every move. The boy appeared at the threshold. No mask, no hesitation. Empty eyes, glistening skin, and a grin carved from cruelty. Alice froze, paralyzed, as the air grew thick with anticipation. He stepped closer, slow, deliberate, each movement intimate, like he was savoring the moment. Alice could feel his presence pressing against her mind, cold, suffocating, inescapable. She tried to run again. Branches tore her clothes, roots twisted around her feet, but he anticipated every path, every hiding place. The forest itself seemed to conspire, guiding her straight into his grasp. Another scream, this time Brenda. Alice turned just in time to see the boy strike. Vet, brutal, precise. The sound cut through the forest, a symphony of terror that left her mind shaking, her body frozen, and then silence. The forest held its breath. The boy paused, studying her, as if measuring the depth of her fear. Alice realized it then. There was no escaping him, no cabins, no paths, no clearing safe enough. Only the slow, intimate, precise terror of being hunted by someone who never forgot how it felt to drown and intended to make her feel it too. Alice ran blindly, her legs trembling, lungs burning with every desperate breath. The forest around her was no longer a backdrop. It was alive. Every tree leaned in. Every root rose like a snare, shadows bending unnaturally to guide her into his grasp. The boy, maskless, pale, relentless, was everywhere, not chasing in a hurry, but patient, intimate, calculating. Every step he took sent shivers down her spine. Every glance, every motion, pressing into her mind like a knife. Branches clawed at her face. Mud grabbed her shoes, but he was closer than ever, emerging from the shadows with a grin that promised pain. Alice tried to call out to Brenda, but her voice caught in her throat, drowned in the wet, dragging sounds of the forest. She stumbled into a clearing. The moonlight was weak, flickering, almost apologetic. And then she saw him, standing perfectly still, watching. Empty eyes, pale skin, a presence older than death. Every nerve in her body screaming that she was already caught. A branch snapped behind her. She spun. Nothing but the sensation remained, a suffocating awareness that he was always just behind, waiting, choosing, savoring her fear. Alice ducked behind a fallen log, heart hammering, breath trembling like fragile glass. The boy circled, slow, deliberate, making the forest itself part of his sadistic game. Each snap of a twig, each rustle of leaves, was a mark, a signal that he knew exactly where she was. Then she saw it. A glimpse of Brenda, motionless, trapped in the shadows, the boy's presence pressing over her like a second skin. Alice's stomach dropped, while rising, terror coiling in her chest. And she realized the forest wasn't just alive. It was him. Every tree, every shadow, every rustle was his instrument. And she was playing right into it. No path was safe. No cabin was secure. Every step, every breath, every heartbeat, he was there, patient, sadistic, hungry. Alice's breath came in short, ragged gasps. The forest had swallowed every sound, every hope. Branches clawed at her clothes, roots tangled around her ankles. But the boy, maskless, pale, perfect, was still closer than ever. She stumbled into another cabin, walls shaking with the wind, but the wind was lying. Every creak, every groan was him, moving silently, patiently, watching, calculating. Brenda was gone. Alice's stomach turned, while rising, terror twisting her chest. She could hear faint, wet noises from outside, dragging, tearing, deliberate, and she knew he was feeding on her fear. The boy appeared at the doorway. No mask, no hesitation. Empty eyes glinting in the weak light, grin sharp, cruel, intimate. Alice froze. Every instinct screamed to run, but she could barely move. Every breath was a countdown. He stepped closer, deliberate, patient. The shadows around him seemed to bend, coil, reach, trapping her in a nightmare she could not escape. Every tree, every branch, every leaf was part of his design, guiding her closer to his grasp. Alice's mind screamed, heart pounding like war drums. She realized then, the camp wasn't just cursed, it was alive, and it wanted them terrified. It had shaped the forest, the cabins, the paths, all to feed this ritual of fear. A scream tore the air. Brenda again, or what remained of her. Alice could only watch, frozen, as the boy moved with precision. Wet, sharp, intimate. Every second, every movement, every strike, designed to imprint terror into her forever. Alice stumbled back, chest heaving, and understood the truth. There was no escape, no hiding. Only the boy, patient, sadistic, and the forest, alive with his vengeance. Every heartbeat was a drum, every breath a countdown, and the night was only beginning. Alice stumbled, lungs burning, legs trembling, the forest around her alive, twisting, suffocating, every shadow bending toward her like claws. Brenda was silent now, gone, or worse. The boy, maskless, pale, perfect, was close, a presence older than death, patient, intimate, studying her fear as if tasting it. She tried to run, paths bending, roots tangling her feet, every tree leaning in, every shadow stretching farther than it should. The forest was his, and she was nothing but prey in his perfect, sadistic game. A sound, wet, deliberate, tearing, echoed behind her. Alice's stomach dropped, while rising, heart pounding like a drum of doom. Every nerve screamed, "You cannot escape him." The boy stepped out from the shadows. No mask, empty eyes, pale skin glistening like the lake itself, grin cruel, sharp, intimate. Every step he took sent a wave of terror through Alice, every movement precise, calculated, feeding on her panic. Alice reached the lodge, doors slamming behind her, thinking maybe, just maybe, she could hide. But the boy followed, every shadow in the lodge bending toward him, every corner a trap, every wall a cage. He struck, slow, deliberate, intimate. Alice screamed, a sound swallowed by the forest, but it was meaningless. He didn't just kill, he chose. He studied the terror, savoring it, twisting it, shaping it, molding it into fear she could never forget. And then he was gone, vanished into the shadows of the forest, leaving only wet, sticky silence, the echoes of screams, and the realization that the nightmare wasn't over. Alice collapsed, trembling, the forest pressing in, and understood the final truth. Camp Crystal Lake wasn't just cursed. It was alive, it was hungry, and she had barely survived its first lesson. Alice lay on the cold, wet ground, chest heaving, eyes wide with terror. The forest was silent, too silent. Branches no longer moved, shadows no longer shifted, but the presence remained, watching, patient, eternal. She tried to rise, legs shaking, body trembling, but every movement reminded her. She was still trapped, still prey in a game she could not fully comprehend. Brenda was gone. Her screams echoed in Alice's mind, a wet, sharp memory that refused to fade. The boy appeared once more, maskless, pale, perfect. No words. No hesitation. Empty eyes, glistening skin, cruel grin. Each step deliberate, precise, intimate. He wasn't just hunting anymore, he was teaching. Every terror, every panic, every broken breath was part of the lesson. Alice backed toward the edge of the clearing, heart hammering like war drums, lungs burning with fear. Every instinct screamed to fight, to run, to escape, but the forest bent, twisted, guided her deeper into despair. He raised a hand, slow, calculated, and the shadows stretched toward her like living fingers, cold, suffocating, relentless. Alice realized there was no ending here. No rescue, no mercy. Only the boy, the forest, and the echo of fear, eternal. Then, as quickly as he appeared, he vanished, leaving only the silence of the night, wet mud under her hands, and the memory of every scream, every strike, every brush with death. Alice crawled forward, knowing she had survived, but barely. The camp was alive, hungry, patient, and somewhere, lurking in every shadow, he was waiting, and she understood the truth. The nightmare never truly ends. It only waits for the next scream,